So Chloe Macintosh is going to talk to us about the wisdom of the body, because we talked about the DNA of us. We talked about, hello, Chloe, how are you doing? We talked about the DNA of us, and yes, we also have a body.
That's right.
Right. So, Chloe, thank you so much for bringing us back into our body a little bit.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'm just going to lay out my little process here, since we are in the flow and adapting. So this is my method of talking without having to learn things by heart and be able to stay in the flow. I post-it the hell out of it. And actually, they left sex and religion to the end, so I think you're on for. Oh. So first, actually, I would like to maybe introduce myself. I met Loic many, many years ago when both of us were doing technology in a slightly different way. So it's really amazing, actually, to reconnect after all these years, maybe 10 or 15 years, and see that, you know, our paths are crossing again with, I think, some common experiences which have changed the way that we do business. So I'm still in technology, but I now have looked at technology in a slightly different way. And I'm just going to talk to you about that. I think that's enough. So my name is Chloe. I'm actually from Paris. I grew up here, and then in '98, I went to London. I was at the time studying architecture in Les Beaux-Arts here, and I decided to go to London for a 2-month experience. And I've been there for 25 years. In this time, I also moved into technology. I started a company that actually makes this furniture, Med.com. A company, interestingly, that actually went out to market a year ago, very successfully in a sense, and then completely crashed to the ground. So as a founder of a unicorn, I actually have absolutely no return on the work that I've done, in the sense that the promise that the tech world and the VC world present to you is to build a business that's going to grow faster, harder, you know, get better and better and better in a very linear manner. And at the back of that experience, I found myself actually having a burnout, which eventually sent me to this place in Alicante called SHA. I don't know if anyone knows of the SHA clinic. But what I would love to communicate to you today, and the intention for my talk, is really to tell you what I've learned about the body, about going from an experience for me that was very cerebral. I grew up with a lot of accent around, you know, building your intellect and performing from a place of the head. I very much believe in the no pain, no gain motto. If you don't suffer, you're not growing. And I think in many ways it's true, but it's not sustainable. So when I had my burnouts and I went to this clinic, I actually chose the SHA clinic because it is an ancient wisdom-based clinic that uses ancient technology, but then helps you bring those back into your everyday life in forms of patterns and practice. And that is the first lesson for me, that everything in life is practice. If we want to change something, improve or develop, there is always a practice that we can create, because our brain is plastic. So we're able to actually change and transform much more effectively that I think sometimes, I would say, traditional psychology has made us believe. You know, a lot of the time we believe that we have a subconscious that is imprinted when we're young, and that subconscious is almost an enemy to us. It can declare itself and come out to surprise us in ways that sometimes we do not have the tool to interact with it. So I've learned to believe that actually that method of thinking, which also translates into the education that we give our children and the types of relationship that we have. We talked about attachment patterns in love. There's a lot of heritage in the way that we interact that comes from that model of thinking that we kind of are the way we are, and the only way to understand ourselves is to do some kind of talk therapy to investigate our brain. In the work that I've developed in the past 15 years, so I started to really go deep into understanding the body, and from, I would say, on an intellectual level first, so really researching and meeting a lot of people. But only 3 years ago, I decided to start practicing with my own body. And it is in that journey that I've learned many, many lessons that I wished I had known when I was much younger. You know, the only kind of feeling I have is, why didn't I ask those questions how long did I stay in this kind of disconnection, believing that the entire experience of life is an expansion of the mind, and because it's such a pleasurable thing for a lot of us to do, to spend time in our head and entertain a form of intellectual masturbation, I had really not understood how disconnected I was from my body. I actually believed I was very embodied because I love dancing, I can relate to people, and I did some somatic work. So somatic work is when someone actually manipulates your body and tries to understand if you're able to move your awareness into your body. And in that experience, I realized in my first session that I was not embodied at all. I was intellectualizing everything, feelings, sensations, emotions. So at that point, I decided to go deeper into the practice, and I really looked at sexuality in particular, and the context of this conference for me really resonates because technology is our most ancient technology. It's how we create life. It's pretty spectacular. But it's also, as Richard was saying, our most advanced. There is nothing more advanced than our own body. It's the one that's evolved the most, that's gone through many more of the challenges. And it has more wisdom, I would say more honest and direct wisdom in the sense that it is not hijacked by our thoughts, it's not manipulated by our emotions. It's actually an imprint that is in the body in itself. And when we do trauma work, in particular in sexual trauma, a lot of the offering that exists today involve talking about the trauma, but you cannot actually free yourself from any form of trauma unless you address the body, because the body keeps the score of everything. And in my research, I really started to understand that in the society that we have built, we have desensitized ourselves. We live in an environment which is far from nature, far from our nature, where we built a lot of concrete and actually barriers to nature. The smell aren't great, so we block our smells. We stop interacting with the environment. And when we stop interacting with the environment, we also have trouble connecting with ourselves. So there is a direct correlation usually between getting closer to nature and starting to find that connection within yourself again. And again, if you start building a deeper connection with yourself, you start really having a desire to find the environment that fits your body, that fits the way that you like to live. So those things are very, very connected. And this is why I think it's really important for us in this era of technology, where again, we were talking about the metaverse, in a sense, visual, the eyesight, is the only sense that really developed a lot in this past, I would say, 50, 60, 100 years, because we have a lot of visual stimulation. And if you think about it, eyesight is the only sense that doesn't have a sensation. Eyesight is still an image, it's still a thought. So all of our referential around our experience of the world is a series of thoughts and images that we then apply emotions to. So instead of experience the world through the body, the way that when we lived in the forest a long time ago, I used to think that we survived with this really soft and fragile, eatable body. We should have disappeared a long time ago. But somehow we survived. And I used to believe we survived because we became really clever at creating devices and tools in order to evolve. And a lot of the research that I've done, and also hearing the testimonials of indigenous people, has made me realize that the reason that we survive is because we hyper-developed our senses. We became a total radar to the environment. We're able to fully understand where we lived in order to evaluate danger. So, really listening to the message of the bird, indicating the jaguar is entering the forest, being able to smell the change in the air defines, things with the weather that might, need for us to move in a different place. So this hypersensorial being that we used to be, which gave us this incredible experience of the world where we are constantly in communication, not just from here, but there's intelligence in all of our organs, has been lost through the way that we've developed our society. And so now, in order to reconnect, I had this experience when I went to SHA. The reason I went to SHA was that I wanted to be working with this meditative person called Stuart Bold. And Stuart Bold was the first person who brought mindfulness into the NHS in the UK. And the first application was actually to help people that had very, very heavy burns. And he was using mindfulness and visualization helping them visualize that they were surrounded by ice. And they saw incredible results with this kind of approach. And it really compelled me because I had tried meditation. I tried a lot of the apps, and I wasn't very good at it. I could see it was really difficult for me to just sit still, focus on my breath, and not think. It just seemed like a really difficult thing to do. So what he was basically teaching me and teaching the group during that week is what we call effortless mindfulness. Effortless mindfulness is the idea that meditation is not, the point of meditation is not to meditate. The point of meditation is to be in a meditative state as often as you can during the day. So you are mindful at every moment of the day. For example, I would have taken my shoes off, but my toes are not good enough, but I would prefer to have bare feet here so that I can ground myself while I talk to you. It just keeps me connected to my flow, and I don't get distracted by my head trying to make me remember something. So when you're sitting here in the audience, it's really important for you to think, how do you use your body when you are in any situation? Even when you stand still, you can be embodied. You can relate to the weight of your body, how it touches, how it feels. Is there any pain? Is there any smell in the air? If you do this practice regularly, and you do it all the time, when you eat, when you drink, when you go to the loo, when you go upstairs, you're just present. You're actually going to make a lot of progress in the benefits that mindfulness brings, which is that presence, that ability to stay present where you are. And so during that week with Stuart, we learned this practice. And the first story he told us was a really interesting story of this scientist who went to Tibet to measure the brain waves of the monks. He really was curious to understand what happens in the brain when you meditate for 15 years every day, for 10 hours a day. So he went to see them, and in order for them to feel comfortable with the material, he put the cap on his own head and started to play with it. And the monks started to laugh. So he got a bit upset and asked the translator, and he said, well, what they're saying is that, what are you doing up here? Meditation happens here. And the importance, I think, of this for us when we talk about consciousness is, for me, consciousness is an intellectual idea again that is not very inviting to a lot of people out there. You feel like you have to kind of graduate and do a certain amount of work to be able to have access to this consciousness. And in this process of learning, what I realize is actually I associate consciousness actually a little bit to what Richard was saying, which is compassion. It's love energy. And the process that I learned was to bring everything into my heart. So instead of meditating by trying not to think, we learn to bring the awareness into the body and into the heart. And from that place, we think, we communicate, we engage with people, which is different. So if you think about the tonality that you can bring yourself into your heart center using your voice. If I speak like this, I'm speaking from my head. I'm going to touch your intellect. If I speak like this, I'm going to talk to your heart. I'm going to talk to you as a person. And so this learning for me was fundamental in the way of reconnecting with my body and actually being able to dissociate from my thoughts. And from that place, I realized you can move this awareness anywhere, including in your genitals. And so at the back of this trip, I developed a method that would help all of us reconnect with our pleasure, especially because 60% of all illnesses and diseases today are stress-related. It's the #1 proxy killer in the world. And today, we teach people to get out of their head by staying in their head and meditate, by trying not to think. It is almost impossible to do this. So I wanted to build a method that was using pleasure, because pleasure is our medicine. It's actually the fastest route to homeostasis, which is balance. When we're in the pleasure zone, we're in the parasympathetic. We relax immediately. So how better way to solve mental health issues than reconnecting people to their body and through pleasure? So my team and a really amazing group of experts, and I built a method, which is a 5-pillar method called the KAMA method. And it's a psychosomatic methodology that brings 2 psycho-pillars and 3 somatic pillars. So this is how it works. If someone comes to us and say, which has happened a lot, I can't have an orgasm with my partner. I'm very happy on my own, I can get there. When I'm with my partner, I can't do it. I don't know why, it doesn't work. So we listen to that and we say, okay, so we're going to apply this 5 pillar. The first pillar is desire. and the importance to reconnect with what we really want. So the first person that needs to do is put an intention. So before you start going into the act, what is your intention? What do you want to achieve? Do you want more pleasure? Do you want more surrendering? Do you want more connection, more intimacy? The second is the heart, is the permission. You have to give yourself permission, because in our society, for women in particular, but I think generally for everyone, we do not have permission to go towards what we desire. So it's important to do, I give myself permission to have this experience that I want. Then we have the three somatic pillars. The first is breath. Breath is obviously the most important part of our experience of everything. So in sex, it's really, really important. Sadly, we intend to have a very shallow breathing. So as soon as we're in the pleasure zone again, so the inhale is a sympathetic breath. It's the fight and fight, it's we're in danger, let's look after the vital organ. It's not a pleasure zone at all. The exhale is a pleasure zone. That's when you go into the parasympathetic. So when you want to have pleasure, focus on the exhale, much more than the inhale. And that will automatically shift the kind of sensation. And that breath is also connected to the pelvic floor. I was having a chat earlier with a few people and actually there was a guy who doesn't know he has a pelvic floor, so some men don't know they have a pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is a hammock that sits between your hip bone. It holds all your vital organs, but it's also responsible for your orgasms. And in our society today, we're in hypertension, so the pelvic floor is stuck in this position instead of being like this, because we're in hypertension, we hold our stomach in, we do a lot of yoga, we stress, so we're always in this tension place. So if your pelvic floor is your orgasm, when you tense, this is your orgasm, right? So if you start working with your pelvic floor, bringing awareness and pushing it with the inhale and the exhale and start actually exercising the pelvic floor in all directions, then you're going to start having this kind of activation. Training the pelvic floor is the most important message I can get across. It's the most important practice you can bring into your everyday life, specifically because you're sitting down, and sitting is known in my field to be the new smoking. We do not know how badly we are affecting our health by sitting down. By the time you sat down for 20 minutes, your metabolism is reduced by 80%. It's a disaster. And on top of that, if you know a little bit about chakra, when you sit down, your coccyx is pulled this way. So your chakra are no longer aligning, so you can't actually channel energy properly when you're sitting. So a lot of the time we do spiritual work and we sit on chair, or we do, creative work and we sit on chair. The creative center is here. In order for it to be activated, it needs to be aligned. So me, for example, I redesigned my house and everything is on the floor. And it's a really, really important part of our health. So the second pillar is movement. When we see very often in sexuality, one person is very passive, the other person is very active. We say motion is the lotion. You've got to keep moving. You have to keep moving your body. It keeps you present, it keeps you active, it keeps you synchronized with the other person. So if a person is too passive, they are not going to be activating. They're not going to be actually inviting themselves into the experience. And then the last pillar is touch. And this is really important, in particular in relationship. One of the classic issues that we hear of is relationship, a couple, which experience what we call mismatched arousal, which means one person intends to want more sex than the other. And so when that happens, people get confused about what to do. And what I try to explain to them is that intimacy, and therefore sexual tension, is the space between me and you. That's all we share. That's the relationship, that space. Everything else is either yours or mine. So the space has to be nurtured, has to be held, and has to be charged with the right kind of intention and emotions, because that's what we're going to be experiencing. So if I'm close to you, and I put intention that I want to interact with you, if I move forward, you're going to feel it, because I'm intending that. So in relationship, very often, when we live together, we become quite casual. We kiss the partner on the head when we come back from work. We touch them with that clear intention. That collapses the space, that collapses the sexual tension. So the important thing in that particular aspect is to remember that touch is intentional, and it's very important, therefore, to create enough space for that tension. It's like magnet. Sexual tension, the closer you get, the harder, and then if you touch, it collapses. So you have to be really prepared at the moment where you touch. If you're not there, it's going to create this mismatch arousal when one person is really online and the other person had a chance to kind of get there. I mean, the time is running out. So I wanted to maybe just quickly mention maybe how this experience has changed the way that I do business, because I think for me that has been actually a very interesting transformation. I raised about $4 million for Kama 3 years ago with an amazing group of VCs in the States. And at the time, my intention was to send a signal that what I'm doing isn't an experimental thing. It really is important. So I wanted to get really good names on my cap table. But then as I developed the project, I realized that this project is very mission-driven. It isn't really about me, certainly isn't about my investors. It is really about bringing something out that is, and has a chance, I believe, to impact and upgrade us at scale. You know, I think there's a big opportunity to use this technology to do some of the things that we're trying to do, but in a way that's, I think, a lot easier. And so what I've decided to do now is to really work towards a decentralized approach. I very, very much resonated with what Jack said this morning. You know, we are going to soon realize that the true value we have to offer is time. And we will wake up in the morning and say, I've got 5 hours I want to spend. I'll go on the board. I'll say I have 1 hour on consulting that I can offer for $2,000 a day. I want to learn a new skill. We will buy and sell our time as a way to interact and work together. And so I'm now looking to fully decentralize my business and never raise VC capital again, with the intention to go back into a more traditional business model, which isn't about growing faster and harder, but actually truly delivering a solution that can help people transform. And if that means I only have 10,000 customers rather than 100,000, then I think it's, for me, at this stage, a truer expression of what I would like to create. Thank you.